Homage to the Triple Gem. So years ago, I was in university. I was a new university student. And I found it very difficult, actually. I'd come from high school, and I'd been goofing off most of my high school life. And in my last year of high school, I decided to get serious, and I started to do my homework. And I started using these things like to-do lists. I got really inspired by to-do lists. I found that if I had a list of things that I should do, then it made my day much more clear, and somehow that just really gelled with my mind. When I got to university, I found that the goals that I had to set were very, very different, and the to-do list just wasn't enough. So over time, through experimentation and also through some time management techniques they taught us, I came up with this idea that the best way for me to set goals in university was to set time-based goals, actually, rather than results-based ones. Kind of found at that time they'd give us, you'd have a course, and there'd be maybe 2 or 3 exams and a project, and that would be your entire mark for the course. And so you had 8 weeks, or I can't remember how, 12 weeks, I believe, something like this. And in those 12 weeks, you had to almost learn an entire textbook, a good portion of a textbook anyway, a lot of the time, and the teacher just gave it to you, and it's like, go ahead. And by the way, about halfway through this course, you've got your midterm exam, and at the end, you've got both your final project and your final exam due. So it seemed like you had a lot of free time, but actually, the way that it worked out was you had to be studying really hard right from day one. Otherwise, you wouldn't finish your projects, you wouldn't do well on your midterm, and you wouldn't know enough for the final exam. So I found that it wasn't really enough for me just to set a goal like, I'm going to finish chapter 5 tonight. I say, I'm going to finish chapter 5 tonight, might just turn into, well, I'll finish it tomorrow. I mean, the thing isn't due for another 6 weeks. Why don't I go out and do some partying? Why don't I go out and hang out with my friends? And I think I made some mistakes like that the very first semester and ended up having to drop courses because I was just too far behind. So learn to set these time-based goals. In other words, to evaluate how much time do I think it would take me to finish this thing, and then just block the amount of time off. And then when that time was done, then I would stop, and I would consider my goal to be achieved. So that kind of method of goal setting can actually have a lot in common with some of the goal setting that we need to do in our meditation practices. There's a parami, which is not part of the canon, but it's a useful list. A parami is one of the qualities that, in the commentarial literature at least, the Buddha is said to have developed in order to fulfill his requirements in order to become a Buddha. One of them is adhitthana parami. It means the ability to set and make determination. You say, I'm going to do this, and you go ahead and do it. Now, one of the aspects of this adhitthana parami that needs developing is that it can be very, very stressful if one just sets a goal for oneself, a very high goal, and then doesn't really have any idea what the process in between is going to be. It can generate huge amounts of stress. As somebody sets a goal, I want to achieve the jhanas on this retreat. Okay, I mean, it's not a bad goal. It's not a bad hope to have. But there can be a lot of things that could change, that could get in the way of achieving the jhanas, including anxiety that one has about whether or not one's achieved them. In the retreats, the clock is ticking away. So, not really knowing what steps are needed to fulfill the goal can make setting results-based goals stressful, can make them inefficient, and they can make them something, because they're stressful, because they lead to anxiety, they create hindrances in the mind that stop one from achieving the very results-based goal that one is wanting to achieve. When there's any goal in meditation, one wants to be reducing the 5 hindrances in general, rather than increasing them. So what I found was with setting these time-based goals, well, I'm going to do this for this amount of time. I didn't know what the process was going to be. I didn't know what was in the chapter. There was one time, I was studying this finance textbook, and I can still remember it almost to this day. Can almost see the pages in my mind. It took me 9 hours to go over 2 pages of a finance textbook. I still remember that. I was kind of just going over these paragraphs, 1 or 2 paragraphs, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And what it turned out was I think I'd had some concepts that I'd learned previously wrong. And so there was just this massive confusion in my mind, and I kept getting blocked. If I tried to go beyond that in the textbook, things just started making less and less sense, it seemed. It could seem that way. And so this can be similar if we try to rush through in our process of developing the mind. I mean, there are certain things that may take much longer to work through than we anticipated. And it's kind of not something that's always so easy to predict. And so we can't really judge ourselves too harshly, like, okay, I'm going to set this goal. I want to, for example, I want to achieve the jhanas by the end of the next 3 months. So somebody sets up a goal like that for themselves. Well, you don't know what things there are hidden in your mind that you have to overcome in order to achieve the jhanas. And as we mentioned, there can be anxiety and remorse associated with that as the goal draws closer, or as the end date draws closer and the goal is still not achieved. That's the kind of feeling that you can get when you're in university. You have been thinking things like, I'll just finish chapter 5, I'll finish chapter 6, and you've got a week left to the exam. It's like, well, I'll just finish a chapter a night. Time starts coming up to the exam, you start feeling this intense anxiety. Obviously, because you haven't budgeted your time well. So in university, studying this way led to a lifestyle, essentially, where almost all of my waking hours were spent being productive or even hanging out with friends or whatever it was. That had to be scheduled. It's like, what are you doing on next Thursday or Thursday 2 weeks from now? You want to go out for a coffee? Kind of schedule that in. And every waking moment of my life was increasingly dedicated towards the task that I'd set for myself to kind of complete university. And I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed going to university. I enjoyed what I was studying. So in a similar way, when we set a task for ourselves that seems simple, like we want to advance towards the ending of suffering, it's good to be able to focus more on the process rather than the results. The process will lead to the results, and the process takes time. So it's more of a matter of what we can control about the goals that we set, rather than what we hope for. It's not wrong to hope for a particular result, but can we control when we get it? Not really. And it's kind of a little bit difficult to control that. So we can set up these goals. I'm going to meditate for X amount of hours today and every day. And in this way, when we set goals this way, we start to see the processes that can be involved in training the mind. Some things take a lot longer to work through than we expected, like those 2 pages in the finance book. Kind of sit down and think, well, it's going to be I should meditate here. One thinks maybe I should just go for it and achieve the jhanas this sitting, and hopefully that happens. But some hindrance might come up that you haven't expected, and that's been lurking in the back of the mind, and that is connected with other things that were unaddressed, that have been stoked or provoked by things that one has said or done or experienced in the course of that day or that week, whatever it might be. So as a result, what should have been something that might have taken, budget for an hour or whatever to get past this hindrance, instead it takes a week, instead it takes 2 weeks. And sometimes it goes away and it comes back up again very, very strong. So we have to be prepared to face off against these things. So when a person starts budgeting their time in this way, what happens is actually that their lifestyle changes. And this is actually what meditation in general should be leading to. It shouldn't just be like a kind of thing that one does one-off, kind of go sit down, meditate. That's okay. You definitely can get some benefits from that. But the more that one becomes serious about trying to train the mind, the more it becomes something that encompasses every aspect of one's life. And kind of the studying, kind of things should be simple to finish university, changes one's whole life if one wants to try to do it well. So practicing meditation in this way, one's whole life starts to change as every action, almost everything that one does, has an impact on one's meditation, has an impact on the way that one's mind functions. And so one has to become increasingly careful about these things, both when one is meditating and one is not. And if one can do this in a way that does not make one stressed out, okay, well, look, I'm going to meditate for this number of hours today, and when that number of hours is up, I've achieved my goal. That's good. You can start to gradually increase that. There's various things you can do with that. But doing that will start to build this particular lifestyle. And while doing that, if one is focusing on the process, gradually one's defilements will diminish. One's good qualities will increase. And this is the way that one knows one is progressing. And it's kind of interesting, actually. I still remember those days in university. Is kind of, you start off, you have no idea about it. I was a business student, really interested in business. And you start off, you have no idea really how to do much. I'm kind of taking like a business course in the last year of high school. But actually, by the time people have finished their 4-year degree or even finished their MBA, they have quite a lot of skills. Some of those people who finish those things, they're really disciplined people, really pretty intense people, and they, have quite a lot of skills. They can get projects done really fast, and they can be very focused. They can work well on a team. And these things are things that build up gradually, step by step, course by course, page by page. And one can generally feel when these business skills are developing. Kind of study a textbook, you learn something new, then you go to apply it. I remember one time I was had a finance course, and there's these ways that in Canada, banks are allowed to advertise their rates of interest, which actually are not really accurate at all. Advertise like 5% interest or something like this. But it's not really accurate in terms of the way that the interest actually compounds. So they have this phrase which is called effective annual return. That's actually what the interest is when everything's taken into account, essentially. So I remember I went to this bank one time when I was a student, and she was trying to sell me all these accounts. Kind of, oh yeah, you got to open up you take your money, you put it into your savings account, you use your checkings account for when you want to buy things, and the transaction fees are much higher on the check or on the savings, but the checkings are lower, but and they had all these things. And I said, what's the effective annual return on checking? It was like 0.01%. The savings was almost the exact same. There was almost no difference, and she looked really embarrassed when I asked her that question. So these skills can gradually build up over time, and eventually one starts to become competent, step by step, bit by bit. Now, the important thing about university is also that there are these exams. There's tests that one has to pass, and one is training, one is building up these skills for the test. If one has prepared properly for the test, then when this challenge comes, then one has the skills to meet it. One can answer the questions on the test. One can do the project well because one has built these things up gradually. And in a similar way in people's meditation practice, their meditation practice actually tends to ripen. There's a kind of a ripening aspect to meditation. There's a ripening aspect to the path. Whereas you don't know when the result's going to come, but you're practicing, and it can gradually ripen these qualities in the mind. And that ripening tends to actually lead to tests. So these tests aren't like somebody shows up with a sheet of paper and asks you to answer multiple choice questions. Essentially what it is that you've had a particular way that you've been directing your mind that you like, that has been causing you suffering. And you're starting to direct it in a different way. Unfortunately, that way that you've been directing your mind in the past is connected with all sorts of things in your lifestyle. Connected with all kinds of things that you like to do. And as a result, it's like a piece of cloth that's being pulled in two directions, and it starts to tear. And as the cloth starts to tear, a person has to essentially make a choice sometimes. Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to continue tearing this thing, or am I going to let it go? And there can be a lot of inner struggle with that. Now, these inner struggles are like the exam. If one has spent the time in meditation building up one's faith, building up one's energy, building up one's mindfulness, trying to build up one's concentration, building up one's discernment, then these are the skills that one needs to overcome these tests, to defeat the defilements that come up in these times of tribulation. And the interesting thing about these times of tribulation, if one pushes through them, if one fights the defilement, if one writes the test well, then when that test is over, that can be when things can open up for a person in their meditation practice. Kind of unusual things might happen to one, and significant things, kind of defilements can get really knocked down at those times. So there are these tests in meditation, midterm exams, final exams. And one keeps on working and working towards these things bit by bit, and eventually there is a graduation ceremony if a person can successfully complete the requirements for their courses. So if a person continues developing their mind in the proper way, in the right way, then there can be significant events like that. Kind of the test gets finished, the midterm gets finished, the skills are being gradually built, and there can be these graduation ceremonies. I mean, a person in university, they can schedule that. This course should take 4 years. You can finish that. But in the course of meditation, that's much harder to schedule. So what we want to focus on, what one wants to focus on as one is practicing, is not necessarily I'm going to try to, get the jhanas, next month, or I'm going to be a sotapanna by the end of the year. One wants to focus one's desires, one's efforts on the process, because it's that process that builds the skills. It's that process that lets one pass the tests, and it's that process that leads one on to the graduation. And so long as one continues on in this process, such that one's wholesome qualities are increasing, one's unwholesome qualities are decreasing, and one's mind is becoming purified, there's nothing that can stop one from passing these tests, and there's nothing that can stop one from graduating. So we can remain focused on our meditation in this way, Setting goals that we can control, goals sometimes about the amount of time, focusing our desires on the process so that we can achieve what it is we set out to achieve, so that we can move towards the ending of suffering.